Hi there, welcome back to another Rage's Ramblings. And this week, I'm going to talk about preparing for gigs, preparing for out-of-town shows especially, where I've actually had a lot of experience.
If you say so. I say so.
Playing out on the road, going for one-nighters or back-to-back nights in different cities. I've had that chance to do that in the past, especially within the last 6+ years with my old band. I haven't had a chance to do a lot of extended touring where you go for weeks at a time. I'm hoping maybe that'll still happen. I've kind of offered my services to a particular Canadian metal band, the artists themselves that need a lead player. Maybe it'll still happen. I don't know, but one of my favorite bands as well. So, hey, if it happens, it happens. It'd be great.
Dream on!
But otherwise, I wanted to talk about preparing. Now, I've got a bit of OCD, I guess, when it comes to making sure I'm prepared and ready to go. Now, the first thing is guitars. Being a Floyd Rose player, it is essential that you always have two guitars, a backup guitar all the time, because everybody knows you break a string on a Floyd Rose, the whole system goes out of whack and you need to change guitars immediately. Now, with me, I always use wireless packs. I use actually the Shure GLX 16D, which is my favorite wireless system. I've been using it for probably 5-6 years, and never had an issue. Now, I'd bought in 2 packs. I'd bought in one that was used, and I bought one that was on clearance, because at one point they were actually clearing it out because they were going to discontinue it, but for some reason they brought it back because I think so many people really liked it, so they brought it back again. So I had gotten one on clearance and one as a used. So that way I always made sure I had 2 packs. I always had the 2 transmitters, and I'd always have an extra receiver, whether I kept it at a jam space or I haven't brought it out on the road, because I'll explain in a minute that I've always got some sort of backup. Now, I'm huge on a backup for everything, the guitars especially. Now, even rhythm guitar players, I've had a guitar player in another band, the rhythm player who was a singer who, would break a string every once in a while. I don't break strings, but he would break strings sometimes, and you don't have time to change a string on stage. Most bands nowadays in my scene and whatnot, you don't have a guitar tech. You don't have somebody, on side stage, backstage to quickly change a string for you. You always got to have a backup. And there's been more than a few instances where he had broken a string on stage. Oddly, it was always a high E, and he was always a rhythm player, but he'd always at least have a backup guitar so that he can, finish the gig. He'd probably have to play a little bit lighter, finishing the gig, making sure he didn't break another string on another guitar. But if heaven forbid, you'd always have to use one of my guitars, I guess. But even in my recent band, with any of our touring out of town, we'd always make sure one of us at least had a backup guitar. So we'd always at least have a third being a 2-guitar player band. So that was something big. Now, bass players, I know usually they don't bring a backup because nobody's going to break a bass string. But we had an instance in my old band where we got to the gig and we went up to play, and there was something wrong with the bass. I can't even remember. It was like a quick sound check before we started playing, and the bass wasn't working. And of course, it had an active system, like a preamp system with a 9-volt battery. So we thought maybe it was the battery, switched the battery, found out it wasn't the battery at all. So it was something in the wiring. And that's the problem with touring, is that you put all your gear into the back of a truck. Like, we used to travel with a pickup truck a lot with a topper on it, or a trailer. Where everybody put the gear in the trailer. Your gear bounces around a lot. There's always stuff that can go wrong. So that's why I was always a big advocate that always prepare your stuff before the show. Like, always make sure everything is in working condition. Everything is working, power everything up, like wireless stuff, make sure all your batteries are changed, make sure everything is ready to go. And especially guitar cases, bass cases, I'm a strong advocate for good molded hard cases, especially bouncing around in vehicles and whatnot, traveling. You want to make sure they're protected as much as possible. Now, that one gig with the bass, she actually had to borrow another band's bass, and they had a 5-string bass, and she'd never played 5-string, so we had to make the best of it. So, but maybe in some instances we'd had talked about bringing a spare bass for extended road trips anyway. definitely would recommend that. And now Backline is the interesting when it comes to amps. Over the years, of course, the traditional gigging rig, of course, which what I have off stage here or off camera here is, the traditional 100 watt tube head with a 412 cab, which of course I stopped using that kind of setup. I actually moved down for a couple of reasons. I moved down to using this rev head, a smaller head, into a 212 cab for a couple of reasons. Now, one, I had a gig a number of years ago where we were provided the Backline. So I was provided a 412 Marshall cab, and when we went up to play, I had my head, which I brought my dual rectifier head. So when I was playing the Metallica tribute band, we were playing an outdoor festival. I had this thing cranked on 10, and the sound guy still could barely hear me. He had to crank me through, and there was something wrong with the cab they provided me, because they gave me, this band's going to get with this cab, right? So I couldn't borrow anything else, and it wasn't the greatest gig because I had to rely on other Backline, and I've never been a huge fan of it. Sometimes I know you can't help it, so that's why I always made sure at least I brought my 212 cab wherever I went. I even brought two sometimes. The other guitar player would even use one of mine if needed be. And even there was an instance once where the other band that we played with that was touring and met up with us to play the show didn't bring cabs. They expected venues to supply cabs, and this venue didn't have it, so they actually used both of our 212 rev cabs, and actually commented they really loved the sound of the revs, which was awesome. But this was my old setup, and I know a lot of bands still use this, but nowadays a lot of bands have changed, and they've actually gone now to using pedal board with direct in-ears, like direct to the PAs and monitoring systems. In our band, we had changed to using in-ear monitoring systems, and we wanted amps and everything to go through the system, so we kind of moved away from using this stuff, and I actually moved to using a Headrush pedal board. And for a couple of reasons as well, because I found it was more convenient for traveling, especially you want to condense equipment as much as possible. So, I went to using a Headrush pedal board. And I had, before that, I checked out the Helix LT. I checked out the Fractal FX, Axe FX, but the Headrush, was the best price. I seemed to like a lot of the features it had, so that's why I had gone to using it. Now, I'll show you in part of my gear prep. Now, I'm a huge advocate for having a backup of everything, and I'm going to show you here. I got another camera set up, and I'm actually going to show here the whole how I travel and how I put my gear together to make sure I've got everything prepared. And I always prepare the night before or 2 nights before, depending on what's happening. And I always make sure everything's packaged really well. All right, so here we've got my Headrush, and then here you'll see this. I really like this bag because, of course, you've got the Headrush pedal board in the bottom section here. Now, of course, being that I always have a backup for everything, in here, I got myself one of these little Headrush little mini boards, one of these little MX5 pedal boards, because if something were to go wrong with my Headrush, even though I don't have all the effects I need in here, at least I'd have my clean, my rhythm, and lead tone already set up, ready to go. Same with the other guitar player. If something happened to his rig, at least we've got my little MX5 here as a backup. So of course you've got your power supply for that. Now, like I was mentioning, I always travel with my Shure wireless unit here, and I'd always have all my cables are always packed up. I'd always put on red, there it is. I'd always put the red, like wire wrap, I can't remember what they call this, on all the stuff I would typically use on every gig. So, you got your speaker cable to go to your, like for me, I'd always have my Headrush cab, always have a mic cable that I would run to our in-ear monitoring system. We had a Behringer X32 that we would run to that, and then our front of house would always plug into our system. So we had a really convenient, really efficient system now. And I'd always bring a backup of everything. So I'd have a backup mic cable, backup power supplies, backup speaker cable. I'd always make sure I had a backup of anything because you never know when a cable or a wire could go. Like even my little cable that I would run from my wireless unit to my headrush board, I'd even have a little backup one, little in case something was wrong with this little cable. So I'd always make sure I had a backup of everything in case anything goes wrong. And luckily, a lot of the time we would get a sound check, but that wasn't always the case where we get a sound check. So always make sure that on the fly, you've got stuff ready to go. Now, the other thing I was mentioning as well is that backup of everything. I wear these wristbands, and I'd always have a couple sets. Especially after the first night, if you're playing back-to-back nights the first night, they'd always get kind of sweaty. I'd always have my in-ears. I always use these Shure in-ears. And I always have a spare one. It's kind of like the one that came with the in-ear system. I'd always have a spare one. And I'd have these little packages where to have extra adapters, extra cords. You always got your extra picks, extra Allen key and whatnot. I'd always bring tape. Always have tape on hand because sometimes I'd play a big stage and I'd want to tape down certain cables so that nobody tripped over them. Especially me, I would go all over the stage sometimes. I never wanted to trip on anything. So, and then as I was mentioning, I'd have my my wireless packs. So I've got one here, and then I'd always have a spare. In here I'd have my spare. I'd always have a spare one, even with an extra cable for one of these as well. I'd have a guitar cable always in here, just in case something was really wonky. I think one show we actually played, there was some sort of weird interference that was happening, and I almost thought I was going to have to go cable and not use a wireless, but thankfully we kind of figured out it was something wrong with the venue. Oh, and the other big thing, batteries. I'd always have a variety of batteries because apparently singers who use wireless microphones never seem to bring enough batteries, and I'd always have to have a battery to help out. So always have on hand a bunch of different kind of size batteries, and I'd always have everything set and ready to go. And having a nice convenient case, and of course, this doesn't take a lot of space. So I've always really liked having this kind of like head rush board or bag. And then of course, I'd always use a power cab. Now, there was one time that we didn't bring power cabs and it turned into a nightmare. Let me just switch cameras here. So yeah, it happened one time that we didn't bring power cabs. We had to it was a well-known establishment, well-known venue that was providing everything, and just for some reason they had issues plugging into our X32 system, and I had to rely on the actual monitor in the in-house, front of house, whatever. The monitor came with me, and the whole show I kept telling him to turn me down. And just I had no control over it. So you want to kind of have as much control as you can over your rig, over your sound, so that you don't have a nightmare gig. It was a really bad gig where we're practically sound checking for 20 minutes. We had to cut our set short, and it's just kind of thing that isn't really cool to have. So you always want to be prepared way ahead of the night. So that's that for this week. Preparing for your gigs, making sure you got everything set up. You check changing strings. That's another thing. I'd usually change my strings on both my guitars, or at least one of them. The one I would be the main one I would use. That I'd always make sure that set of strings was changed the night before, because although sometimes it was funny because I'd want to play one night and play another one another night, or I would want to switch halfway through a set and use both guitars. So, and that actually happened one time, even though I've never broken a string live. I actually had, years ago, I had one guitar during the show, and this was in the Metallica tribute, that it started cutting out on me, and it was an electrical issue actually with my guitar. So I had to quickly, during a spot where it was a break for me, I switch guitars. And that was a nice thing about having the wireless, is that click, one pack off, click the other one on, boom, barely missed a note in the song. So that's why I've always been a big advocate for a backup for everything. All right, now new this week, I'm going to start introducing Paulo's weekly audio pick. And this is going to be because I'm a huge lover of music. I listen to a lot of old school stuff. So I'm kind of pushing myself to try to listen to more newer music. I love my stuff from the 80s to the early 90s, but it's kind of like lately I want to try to give stuff a chance. Even artists that are bringing out new albums, I'm trying to listen to something. So every week I'm going to try to feature something new that I'm listening to. And if it's not something new, it'll be something old that I can give a shout out to. So the first one this week is actually going to be Judas Priest's new album, Invisible Shield. This album is absolutely amazing. I was not what I was expecting. It's got an old school sound. Songwriting is kind of old school, but it's got some modern elements. Of course, it's got modern production in it, but the songwriting is where it really captures me, is that the songwriting and the guitar riffs are just amazing, and that it doesn't sound cheesy. It still has that traditional edge to it, but it's not cheesy in any way. And Rob's vocals are right on point too. Like, you can't even tell this guy. How old is he now? Is he close to 70? 65? How old is this guy? That guy seems like he's going to be belting it out forever. His vocals are so strong. And of course, guitar leads, great guitar leads through this album. I think Richie plays most of the leads on this album. I was watching some of the live stuff, and it seems like he does a lot more of the lead work now than Glenn does. And it's just even like dive bombs, really tasteful melodic runs. Like, it's just an amazing album. I'm so pleased with this album, especially Judas. I've never been a huge Judas Priest fan. I was always more of an Iron Maiden fan, but Judas Priest, they really captured me with this album. And my choice cut on this album would be God as My Witness. I really like the pounding in this one, the driving force in this, and some really good riffage. So that's my pick for this week. All right, so that's my episode for this week. And then next week, before I go, I know I don't ask it enough, but if I could get you to please like and subscribe, that would help out huge with algorithms. I'm trying to grow my channel a bit. I'm hoping that by the end of this year, I could probably hit 1,000 subscribers. And it'll kind of, enforce me to do a bit more. It'll kind of give me some inspiration to do more of these videos and whatnot. I've been doing it every week lately, and that's definitely been a huge help for me in the last bit. So that'll be a huge help if you can subscribe. And then next week, I'm actually going to feature this guy, which is a Schecter, which is unusual for me. I've never been big on Schecter until I actually played one, which is interesting. And I'll explain next week on why I chose this over a Charvel and an Ibanez for a Super Strat. So watch for that next week. And until then, shred on. Take care.